Hi, everyone. This is Raquel.
Hi, and this is Jennifer.
Welcome to Madness Cafe.
This is a feminist podcast where we talk about women's issues, politics, and health and wellness.
And where those issues intersect. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Madness Cafe. Today, our guest is Susan Beth Miller, the author of this lovely book right here, By the Way I Love You. But Susan is not just the author of this book. Susan is a clinical psychologist in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and she is the author of the novels A Beautiful Land and Indigo Rose, as well as 5 psychology books. Wow, Susan, you are a very busy woman. Thank you so much for taking time to be with us today and to talk about this lovely book right here.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. Pleasure to be here.
You said one of your psychology books and By the Way I Love You both speak to young people who have an emotionally destructive parent or parents. Why does this topic resonate with you as a writer?
Okay, good question. I think for a number of reasons. The psychology book I wrote actually started from some interactions with a young woman that I was working with who had a pretty destructive parent, and somehow, despite that, had a lot of resources personally, sort of backbones of good mental health, but she was under a lot of stress. And so in her case, I was struck by how much mileage she could get from some pretty basic input from me about sort of what's reasonable parenting and what isn't. And just to for her to be able to recognize that, okay, a lot of the things she was being exposed to were not her doing, and not a result of some unusual characteristics of hers, but really originate with the parent. It was so helpful to her and yet so basic in some ways. So I think that was what triggered me to want to write that book. In the background was the fact that I had my own experiences growing up with one parent who had very severe mental illness and other people in the family, and so could definitely identify with that young woman I was working with, and had some wishes that I had been on the receiving end of some of that advice and information. So many contributing factors.
Now, Leslie, your main character of this
Mhm.
book, has sort of doesn't, the book doesn't really tell us she had a horrible relationship with her mother. Is kind of ambiguous. We're not, the
Yes.
question is always there in the back of our mind. What is this relationship really about? Tell us a little bit more about that, and perhaps how it ties in again with you being a psychologist.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction. I actually did not think of this young woman, the main character of this book. She does not have a horrible mother or a tremendously destructive parent, neither parent. She has a traumatic loss or early loss of a parent at a time that, she's not really mature enough to handle it well. It also comes during the rocky time of adolescence when kids often are, especially, well, I don't know, sometimes boys get quiet and girls get rude, during a certain stage of adolescence, with exceptions. But so Leslie lost her mother during this time when she wasn't treating her mother very well. So it
Mm.
left her with a whole lot of guilt. So that was one complicating factor for her. But it wasn't so much that she had a terrible mother, more that she had so many unanswered questions and sort of loose ends from her adolescence.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of ties for me between that, sort of developing that theme in the book and some of the work that I've done over the years.
Mhm. Speaking of that, as far as fragments or the unanswered thoughts and questions that Leslie has. There's one sentence that you wrote that I actually, there's a lot of sentences that you wrote in the book that I thought were really, really well crafted. I'm a little bit of a sentence nerd, so when there's a sentence in something that we read that I think is just beautifully written, I like to call it out. But on page 38, she's talking about the memories of her mother or thinking about her mom. And she says, my memories from earlier are like islands in a sea of fog. And I thought, okay, first off, it's just a beautifully written sentence, but it so perfectly captures that phenomenon of, yeah, you don't remember a whole bunch about your childhood, but some things come through and you don't really know how they connect or what's before this memory and what came after that memory. It's not set in like a full day. It's just
Yeah,
here's a
there's not a
moment.
narrative that combines one thing or
Right.
connects one thing to the next. It's just isolated bits.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and I
that
think,
really spoke to me because I
yeah.
have a lot of that.
Well, and I think most people do. Like
Mhm,
in working as a therapist, it's really common that people will tell you, I can't remember anything about my childhood. And then when they talk to you, they remember about what most people remember, which is very fragmented and a very tiny, tiny percentage of what they actually experience. So I think that's quite normal. In Leslie's case, she has the extra challenge of no new memories being, or no new experiences. So all
mhm,
she has is, that fragmented early life, whereas typically someone who this character's age is, um, I guess 18, 18.
mhm.
But when her mother dies, she's like 16. So typically, when you're that age, you're still in relationship to that person. So some of what's uncertain about the relationship, there's an opportunity, it may not get sorted out, but there's some opportunity for that. In her case, all she has is the memory. So it's not a lot of solid ground to stand on.
Right, right, and a lot of guilt associated with some of those memories because she's like, I didn't really wanna be around my mom at that time." And,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, as we see in the book, that guilt at just being a regular kid, like, like you said, teenagers, I mean, well, let me speak for myself. I was a little bit snotty as a
Yeah.
teenager. I went through that phase, maybe I'm still in it. I wasn't always the nicest to my mom or my brother or other family members, and if one of them had passed or not, I mean, I still carry guilt from that, and they're all still here. But for Leslie to be navigating so many new things, like going off to college, trying to make new friends. I mean, trying to find our way in the world and trying to be like a mini adult. Or like when you're in that phase where you're like, I'm a pseudo adult, like I live in a house, And so I think it was just really interesting that you portray Leslie in that way that the guilt is such a huge part of who she thinks she is
Hmm.
and how she portrays herself to other people.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's hard for her, she wouldn't say it like this, but that she can't just feel guilty, like, oh, I shouldn't have done that.
Mhm,
For her, it becomes, this is who I am, this person who behaved in this way toward her mother, because the story just ended there for her.
mhm.
There's no subsequent relationship where things are better or there's no repair.
I'm curious, Raquel, for you and maybe for you, Susan, as well. This book, reading it, I definitely regressed myself a little bit into my own childhood and thought about my relationship with my mother quite a bit while I was reading it. Raquel, did it bring up that for you? And how about Susan for you when you were writing it?
Uh, Susan, do you wanna answer first
No,
or do
you go ahead.
okay. Yeah, it brought up a lot for me. And crap, now that I'm thinking about it, it's also there's some parallels here. Crazy. My mom had cancer when I was a kid as well. I mean, thankfully she didn't pass from that, but I think because of that health complication, I always had this sort of oversized fear of losing my mother.
Uh,
Mm.
And so anytime I wasn't the perfect daughter, however that's defined, right? Then
Right.
I was like, I'm a bad kid. I'm the worst daughter ever. Oh my God. And so there was just like this whole enormous amount of guilt. And to be perfectly honest, I mean, in some ways it's taken into my 50s to sort through that and move beyond it. So, wow, now that I'm saying all this, Leslie makes so much more sense to me. Like it's just,
Yeah.
yeah,
oh
she's
wow.
captured. She's captured really well.
Yeah.
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 What about you,
Wow.
Susan?
Yeah. I had to think for a minute when you asked that question. I think the answer is that, and maybe this is a characteristic of just, writing fiction that this happens, is that I don't think I was thinking about my own mother much or remembering her much. I was just writing her. In other words, and on the face of it, it the story doesn't overlap my own that much. My mother didn't have cancer and she died when she was 70, but I think if you just scratch the surface, not too hard, there's a lot of connection in that my mother, because of a severe mental illness, she really, in some ways did die and it
Yeah.
was when at that age for me.
Yeah.
It did leave a tremendous amount of guilt, not always that consciously, but and then all kinds of unanswered questions that came out of my ways of relating to her, her ways of relating to me. So
Hmm.
definitely in there, you know. And
Okay,
anything you write, I mean, there you are, one way or another, you know.
for sure. Okay,
So,
big spoiler alert. People who don't want to know too much of the book, stop listening right now because I have to say something about it.
But then come back.
But then come back. Maybe like 3 minutes. Fast forward somewhere towards, I don't know, 3/4 of the book, Leslie finds out that perhaps her mother didn't want children. Maybe didn't want her, not that she didn't
Mhm.
want her, but didn't necessarily want to have children, or definitely didn't want to have a second sibling. And I recall having a very similar conversation with my niece about my own mother when my mom was going through Alzheimer's. Also think this is a huge feminist issue. Also think this is like right on the cusp of politics right now in the United States, with so much pronatalism being shoved at us from every direction.
Hmm.
But I really thought about that moment of what's it like to be a mother when maybe you didn't really want to be a mother, or were on the edge of one, because emotions are complicated, right? I'm sure her mother wanted to be her mother, but maybe also didn't want to be her mother. And to me, that was a big move in the book. How how did you get there in that writing of her mom maybe not even wanting this motherhood,
Mhm.
maybe even familyhood? It sounds it was very ambiguous.
Yeah,
So we're
yeah.
left to think
Mhm.
about these things.
Yeah. And that was one element of the story that, I couldn't connect in any obvious way to my own experience. I wasn't, quite, I'm not quite sure where it came from, except to say that I was trying to think about the fact that, Leslie has her own guilt that grew out of the illness, the mother's illness, but there's also something going on with the mother independent of the fact that she was ill. that was real. It wasn't made up by Leslie. It wasn't the most horrible thing in the world, but it was a quality that the mother had of being removed from the relationship. So I was trying to account for that in some way. I didn't want to go into it very deeply, but just sketch out some kind of a story that could, make sense of that. And you could have gone in a lot of ways with that, but I did go in this direction of the mother's ambivalence about motherhood. And I tied it to something in the mother's own history, but could have been lots of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
There's that, the book The Hours.
Yes.
Yeah, where there's a mother. Could see some parallels there. That
Mm-hmm.
mother is, often reading and just in her head and not, again, not a bad person, but not fully present as a mother.
Not every
Or
mother like shines to motherhood,
Yeah.
or just
you
maybe
know?
not the mother that one person needs or wants, right? Like somebody might be like, "Oh, that's cool that my mom's kind of a little hands off. That's cool. I know she
Uh-huh.
loves me, but she's not like all up in my business, right?" But other people might be like, "I really want my mom to be more, physical and huggy," where some people might be like, stop with the hugging,
Yeah,
right?"
absolutely. Right. There's
I
a
have one of each of those
chemistry,
kids.
chemistry issue. And not all mothers can, maybe we
Oh,
shouldn't ask that of them,
Mm-hmm.
adapt perfectly to the
Right.
temperament of each child that's in their life.
it's
Right.
really
Exactly.
hard.
Yeah.
On 251, this is my favorite small quote of the book. You say, I can't disappear just because she couldn't appear.
Oh.
I
I
understand that too.
I was like, wow. And that to me, that sort of speaks of that. Oh my gosh, motherhood. And the topic of motherhood right now in politics. And it's like not every woman shines to be a mother.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And yet most women, probably prior to our generation, that was their path. There
Yeah.
weren't a whole lot of other options.
Yeah, not a lot of other options that the society, I mean, concretely, like ways to make a living and things of that sort, but also internally, I think there's such a problem of people feeling like you may have options to live, but you don't have options to be of value, to be
Oh,
valued.
yes.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then
Yeah.
at the same time, when you are a mother, sometimes you're, oh, just a mother. So where can you go as a woman? We know
Yeah.
it's hard sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
You
you have
know,
a valid point there.
and kind of tied into that about maybe having a different understanding of Leslie's mom was this kind of mom as opposed to that kind of mom, but that doesn't mean necessarily that she was a bad mom. The literally right before the part that you just mentioned, Jennifer, in the book, on page 248, where Tan is talking to Leslie about that letter, that camp letter, and a bunch of other stuff, a bunch of memories that Leslie has about her mom, and he talks about fake versus forced.
Hmm.
Oh,
And I
yeah,
thought
yeah.
and I thought that was a really, really good point to bring up because Leslie talks a lot about the smile on her mother's face when she was sick and she was in bed. And the way that I kept thinking about it was she's trying to put a smile on her face so she doesn't scare her kid. So maybe her kid will feel a little more relaxed. But Leslie was seeing it as, oh, she's just being fake. She's just being phony. And if it's forced, that means it's bad. So either way, whether it's fake or it's forced, it's all bad. Like none of it means anything. She was just,
Yeah.
putting on an act. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I thought that was a worthwhile distinction too that the young man makes, and Leslie is still in a pretty adolescent way determined to defeat any nuance, right, for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, or maybe fearful of treading into, onto a more nuanced terrain. She's going to just keep it black or white. But I think, as the story progresses, she is able to find that nuance, which represents a separation between her and her mother. Like, okay, yes, her mother can have a shortcoming without that immediately becoming her shortcoming or her fault.
Right.
Or, she can let her mother be a little bit more of a separate person who had
Human being.
and had her weaknesses. Yeah. Yeah.
I should tell people, listeners, because we have a lot of listeners in this area. This book takes place in Ann Arbor, and you talk a lot about the public land around Ann Arbor. I forget the name of the park, Bird
Oh,
Park,
Bird Hills.
Bird
Yeah.
Hills, and some
Yeah.
other ones. But then you also specifically, part of the book is about Leslie kind of being a steward of the land.
Hmm.
Why was that an important component for you to bring into the book?
Oh, and can I just
Yeah.
tag onto that? Why was it also important that a land contract be part of that
That
storyline?
history.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
storyline.
Okay. Well, a lot of different elements there. There's a personal element there in that I'm just a person who's passionate about natural spaces and I grieve about them a lot these days. So
Mm,
it was pretty natural for me to think about whether there might be a space in the story for that emphasis. It wasn't clear to me at the beginning that there was, and I didn't want it to just be forced in there, but so I think I just started to play with the idea and see if I
hmm
could, if there were any real connections that could be established, and I felt that there were. And what happened in the story, to my mind, was that Leslie kind of happens, well, she doesn't happen across, she's sort of guided to this place, and it's not a manicured place, it's a wild place, and it starts to elicit in her a lot of love, basically, and joy, and just deep appreciation. And it's very unscripted for her. It's not school where somebody says, this is a great, book, you should value it, or her
Right.
friend who says, this is a wonderful park, you should think it's the best park on earth. No, it just comes out of her that she responds. And so as that's happening, one of the kind of curative elements of the whole thing is that she starts to recognize in those emotions her own capacity for love and attachment and taking care of, and it begins to interweave in certain ways in her mind with the failures that she feels she demonstrated with her mother, right, where she didn't love her well enough, she wasn't protective of her, she didn't, so that's where I saw the connections there. So the land contract, well, for me, and it's just again gets to some of my own interests in history, land does have history, right? And
Yes, ma'am.
yeah, and I've owned some pieces of land because I've had this passion to preserve them. But with one in particular, I just became aware of the history and of who has been able to hold on to their land and derive value from it and who has not.
hmm
So I was just, and in my own life, I've had a lot of important roots that have connected me to African American people in Chicago, where I was born. So it was just in my mind, that this piece of land might have a history that would be meaningful to a reader and hopefully to be meaningful in certain ways to the character as well.
Right.
Of course,
And just,
their history has to do with loss.
I
yeah.
do love the way that you tied Leslie's loss with now I'm forgetting the character who
Frank.
Frank's, yes, with Frank's, and she's actually angry at Frank for
Yeah.
losing, for his family losing the land.
Yeah. Yes.
I got a little annoyed with Leslie about that.
Oh, see, I thought that was for me and my own grief. I totally understood that. I was like, oh, it really isn't about Frank. It's about her anger and her
Right.
mother. And
Right.
her mother left her. How could Frank, like her mother, let
No,
this land go?
right.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
get it, but I still was like, ugh,
Sure.
it's history. But
Well,
I
well,
just
yeah,
want
and
to.
you should be annoyed with her.
Oh,
Also,
okay, good, thank you.
she's also, uh, it's her immaturity,
Yeah.
right? And she's struggling to get to where, because part of her knows she's being ridiculous with
Mhm.
Frank, and part of
Mhm.
her is just being ridiculous. So,
Yeah.
And
yeah,
Yeah.
also, this book is written for young adult audience, or
Right.
at least it's marketed
yeah,
towards a young
yeah, it
adult
Right.
is. Yeah.
audience.
Right. And I just want to toss in there really quick for people who don't know, land contracts were back in the day were the only way that, or basically the
Mostly.
only way that that black people could purchase land, and it wasn't through a bank necessarily. It was a white person would own the land, and the black people would then make payments to this white person. If one payment was missed, if it was one day late, I'm sure in some cases even if it was an hour late,
Yeah.
that land, any money that had been paid into it, any crops that maybe had been grown that were, on the land, any home that had been built on the land, that reverted to the or white owner of the land. So that's where, because Frank's family owned the land because of a land contract and then lost it because they missed one payment. And Frank has this reasonable grief around the fact that basically his family was done dirty, and this land that his family loved, that his father loved so much, and that because of this injustice, his family now didn't have that land, and then everything that ripples from that. So injustice in this land, it's pretty much inherent. Like it's either, it's being lost because of a land contract, or developers coming in and pillaging. So
Hmm.
This is one part of history that some people don't understand, why there's so much wealth disparity in this
yep.
country. They don't understand that Black people, women, in a certain regard, couldn't get a mortgage to own a
Yeah.
piece of property. And
Mhm.
so where does wealth pass down through? In lots of cases, it's through property. White, well-to-do families have been able to pass that wealth down generation after generation, whereas Black families haven't been able to buy the land in the first place, or they've been on a land contract, or they lost it. And people don't
Or
understand.
eminent domain, and they would just build a highway through it.
Well, they did that too. And so this is the history that some people don't want to teach in school right now. And so this is
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
book banning, this is education banning, this is why we have to tell these stories. So I think it's actually pretty cool you put it in the
Yeah.
book.
Mhm.
It was important to me to put it in there because as I don't know when I learned about these practices, but it was just so clear how incredibly impactful that would be. Well, in a number of ways. First of all, on a family's capacity to have any kind of generational wealth,
Mhm.
100%.
hugely, and and also emotionally, I guess
Yeah.
because of my own, ties to land, to think that your land was stolen from you, and that it's set up that way, from the beginning, that you
Mhm.
to take advantage of the tiniest little slip.
Mhm.
I
It
mean,
would
isn't
be
that the
so
history
infuriating.
of our whole country? Like
Yep.
even before we were here.
Yeah, it kind of makes you think
Yeah,
about the grief of Native Americans a little differently, doesn't it?
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in the book, I kind of like that Frank he was very tired, right?
Hmm.
And grief was just a part of his being, but he wanted Leslie to get engaged in that land, and he wanted, in a way, he was happy to see her carry this fight forward. So he wasn't totally disengaged. He was just gonna not take the lead there for a while.
Yeah.
Who
Yeah.
knows what might have happened later, if she had success in her endeavor, maybe he'd step back in. But
Yeah. Yeah.
Sadly, most of those things don't go the way that we want them to go.
well, I know
No, not at
that.
all.
Once it seems like right now, all the incredible amounts of protests that are going on all over the United States, and yet nothing is stopping anything.
Yeah,
We
not
just
yet
Well,
anyway.
things
Not
are
well,
things are stopping. I
yeah,
mean,
that's true.
I think we're at least putting
Months.
up roadblocks, right?
Yeah.
Like there's speed bumps at least at this point. I'm being optimistic.
You are being
Well,
optimistic. I
and
like it.
yeah,
This
and
is the
also
opposite.
the resistance, hasn't had a lot of time yet. I mean, it feels
Yeah.
like forever because things are coming at people so fast and furious that you think,
Hmm.
oh my goodness, we've lost the battle, but it hasn't been a lot of time.
It's been
Yeah.
what, 3 months or
Yeah, like
Yeah,
140 days or
yeah,
Oh
150
my
days. Like it
God.
hasn't been that long, but it feels
yeah,
like 1,000 years.
yeah,
A
yeah.
1,000 years. Going back to the whole mother relationship thing, Ivori's relationship with her mom just it seems like this it's just so ideal, right? And Leslie even says it many times in the book, wish she was my mom, right? Wish my mom was more like that. Wish I had that relationship with my mom. I think that was a really important point to have in the book of especially as somebody who's looking at their mom going, my mom's not perfect. Why can't I have that mom? I don't know. I just thought that was a really
Did,
important
did you
point to have
want
in the
her
book.
mom?
I did. No offense, mom.
I feel that
And,
coming
and
from you.
no offense to the rest of my family who because some of my family watches this on YouTube, but I don't have the typical relationship with my mom, and so I have felt those feelings. I mean, especially in college, I would look at these kids who were like, "My mom's my best friend, and we have lunch
Yeah.
every week," and la la la. And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Oh, well, shit. Okay. Let me just go back over to my crazy dysfunctional family. Yeah, they love me, but they're crazy and dysfunctional." Yeah, reading that, I had a little like, oh.
And I wasn't truthfully so much wanting Ivori's mother to be the perfect mother or their relationship to be so perfect, but just that for Leslie, who had
Right.
no mother, that's how it would look,
Hmm.
and also so much they had such a
Yeah. Yeah, they
uh,
had a lot of connection.
lively relationship, and
Hmm.
yeah,
And see, to me, it didn't seem like the perfect relationship, but what I did notice is her mother was present.
yeah,
Her
Right.
mother
Okay.
was present with her.
Okay, so
yeah.
I was channeling my 18-year-old self and calling it perfect because as an 18-year-old, I would see stuff like that. I'd be like, oh,
Mhm.
that's the perfect mom-daughter
Totally, totally.
relationship.
I get it. Yeah.
Yeah, so wow, that was really easy for me to like tap into my 18-year-old self. Whew, man, she's right at the surface there, people.
Susan, did you want to read a little bit from your book for us today?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. It's interesting, the passage that you mentioned, I don't remember at all writing, but I must have. That happens.
Yeah,
But,
you've written a lot of stuff, Susan. Come
yeah,
on.
I I'm sure I did write it. I'm not suggesting I didn't, but okay, so I had picked out a passage from near the beginning of the book, actually page 38. And this is mostly a flashback that Leslie is having. Or not a flashback, just a memory that she has of the time when her mother had just gotten sick and she's interacting initially with her father. He told me she was sick, so the next time she came to my door, I squinted and gave her a hard look over. Nothing. My dad can be a drama queen, so I figured that was the point of the sickness story. Probably his way of saying, be nicer to your mother, Leslie. And yeah, she was bugging me around that time, and I was ragging on her some. But I was a teenager. What did they want from me? But she was actually sick. She called for me one night. I didn't want to go see her in her bed. It was a hospital room in there, the stale smell and clutter. But she called and called, so I had to go. I went and stood at the door, my face a gray wall. What? I asked her. I just wanted to see you. Okay, you've seen me. When I was back in my room, I replayed how she'd straightened her nightgown because it was twisted and tight around her knees. She combed back her hair with the spread fingers of both hands and tugged at the shoulder straps of her nightgown, as if every minor thing was making her uncomfortable and she needed a nurse to straighten her out in the bed. She'd attended to that same body, that same frizzy hair that curled over her forehead for all the years of her life. She knew how her breasts fell against her chest, and maybe, who knows, how they sagged over time. She knew if one was bigger than the other, like mine, and if there was a beauty mark that had turned to cancer in between. And she knew whether she liked having them and liked being a woman, which I don't. That same week I learned about her cancer was the week I read about monarch butterflies. They were crashing. Millions were dying or not reproducing because there's no milkweed and they need that plant. Someone posted a picture of a monarch with half its wing eaten away. Probably it didn't have enough energy to get away from what was chasing it. It looked pitiful. The next week I saw Mom weeding the garden. It was July and the air felt like it could birth a thunderstorm any minute. She was wearing a pink and blue skirt and a wide-brimmed straw hat. She looked like a mother in a picture book. What are you doing? I punched her with my words. I'm weeding the garden. That's milkweed you're pulling. Don't you know that? Monarchs need milkweed. Do they need this particular plant, honey? There's a whole patch by the garage and another clump in the backyard. It's squeezing out the lovely phlox here. Have you smelled them, Les? They're heavenly, and the hydrangeas are blooming. So gorgeous. They need every plant. They don't have nearly enough. I could see her wanting to sigh because I was being so difficult, but she didn't. All right, then, I'll leave it if you feel so strongly about it. It's not about how I feel, it's about reality and all the stupid people who don't care. She stood up slowly, uncramping herself because she'd been kneeling for a long time. She looked like an old lady with arthritis. I guess that would include me, she said with a tiny, sad laugh. After that, I started painting butterflies on big pieces of brown wrapping paper, all kinds and colors, not just monarchs. I got totally into it and stayed up night after night, painting them in every size. My idea was to cover my entire room, ceiling and all, in a wallpaper of butterflies. I saw a YouTube of a migration of painted lady butterflies, an endless river of them, so fucking beautiful. I wanted my room to be like that, just the opposite of the dying monarchs. It would be butterflies everywhere you looked, as if you were set down in the middle of their migration, or you were one of them, floating and flapping through the air, not a stupid human stuck in one place.
I'm so glad that you read that passage because there were two themes throughout the book that I was hoping you would talk to a little bit today. One of them being the butterflies, and then the other being dreams and memories.
Mm.
If you could, I know we're running a little short on time, so since we just read about the monarchs, if you could talk about the theme of butterflies throughout the book, that would be great.
Yeah. Truthfully, I was a little ambivalent about that theme just because of the kind of girly associations,
Hmm.
in I don't know, fabrics for girls' clothes or
Yeah. Yeah.
And the publisher, when they were first doing some cover design, they were going to put butterflies all over it. And I was like, I don't know about that. And even an earlier book had a butterfly issue, but I won't segue into that. The self-help book. But the monarchs, I think just the sense of fragility may be something that's beautiful, but it is fragile. It does need protection. Sometimes we fail to protect, as individuals, but also as a species, we do a very good job at not doing a good job there. And I think for Leslie, it kind of worked as a symbol both of herself and of her mother. So it's her mother who's dying, right?
Mhm.
But she's so young, Leslie's so young that in a sense there's not much separation between her mother dying and herself dying. When you're a kid, if your mother
Mhm.
dies, you die. So
Right.
she's angry at her mother who's dying because it suggests that she may not make it.
Mhm.
So I'd say, the fragility. And then also in this passage, there's just the beauty and the kind of wishful imagery of being able to just be part of this endless, beautiful migration, nothing stopping you, nothing on your mind, just
Yeah.
floating beautifully along in life.
Mhm. Yeah. And maybe even the beginning of her, you know, social justice around nature. She
Yeah,
starts at home with telling her mom, "Don't pull out that milkweed.
yeah,
It's not just a
definitely.
weed in your garden, it serves a purpose."
Yeah, definitely that's the case, and I think there's a both a similarity that she has to her mother, but also a difference with respect to things that are growing, because the mother loves her garden, but Leslie ends up being drawn to more untamed.
The
Mhm.
wild.
Yeah,
Mhm.
not the dahlia, which is gorgeous, but it's hybridized. It
Mhm.
doesn't have a smell,
Yeah, very very
produce.
cultivated.
It's yeah. So they do have that common ground, but yet also a difference. And I guess for Leslie, could she take any pleasure from the common ground, or does she only just have to say, "Oh, well, we're nothing alike," and she hated me or something?
Yeah.
End of story.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you planning on writing more books about Leslie?
I've never done that or really had a thought of doing that, continuing on with the same character. So I'm working on another book. Leslie is not made an
Not in
appearance.
it?
And this one will not, it would be probably for an older audience, but
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Was there anything you wanted to tell our audience that we didn't give you the chance to say today?
The only thing that was on my mind, I'm not quite sure where to go with it, but because I listened to, I don't know if it was your previous interview with the trans scientist.
Amethysta Herrick.
Yeah, yeah, Amethysta. And she was talking a lot about gender dysphoria and the
Mhm.
fact that it's not a DSM
Mm.
condition. It doesn't have to have a diagnostic label, and it doesn't have to be associated with the desire to change genders or anything, like that. And so I thought, well, Leslie would be a really good example of that because she actually is struggling a lot with that variety of gender dysphoria in that she's very uncertain about her femininity, right? And what she
Mhm.
wants from it, what she wants to take, what she wants to reject, how it connects her to her mother, how she feels about sexual engagement specifically. So I was just thinking about that aspect, which is just a developmental aspect of the book.
Well, I think it's so great that you brought that up. And I think that what Amethysta said has really stuck with me, that we all have had these feelings of
Mhm.
gender dysmorphia. And I know in myself with the clothing that I want to wear, just things that I felt like a tomboy, right? Why do we
Yeah,
even have words like tomboy?
yeah,
Couldn't I just be
yeah,
a girl who likes
yeah.
to climb trees?
Yeah,
Right?
Yeah.
and in a sense, why would we not have, why would most
Why
people
would we
not have
not?
some of those feelings? Because
Hmm.
gender is something that is affixed to you very early in life, and
Yes.
it's so defining and it can
Yep.
be confining. Uh,
Hmm.
and so you're
Hmm.
bumping up against it all the time, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
not always going to be good,
I'm
sometimes
so
Yeah.
glad you brought that
it's
up.
problematic. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many themes in this book that we literally could spend so much time talking about.
It's a good
Uh,
book for a book club.
absolutely.
It really is.
Okay,
Absolutely.
book clubbers out there, you hear that?
Yeah, it is because there are so many things to talk about.
Yeah. Susan, you've written a book that gives people a lot to think about. Obviously, it's brought up a lot for both myself and Jennifer. I'm sure it brings up a lot for other people. So yeah, I mean, it makes, I mean, it's even making me think about stuff now that, I don't always think about, like things from my own childhood and butting up against gender dysmorphia. Like, hey, as a little kid, do I have to wear dresses all the time? Like, can I wear jeans like my brother? Come on.
Yeah.
I literally had that argument with my
Yeah,
mother.
yeah,
I didn't
Yeah.
want to wear dresses
yeah.
anymore,
It's real. It's
Yeah,
you
I
totally
know?
was
real.
thinking about this topic yesterday after I'd listened to the interview you had done, and I was remembering contemplating as a child whether I would prefer to be a boy and thinking I wouldn't be a very good one because I thought boys were supposed to be very brave and so I felt like I was hiding, in girl I mean this is all
Hmm.
ridiculous in a way, but in the girl part of the universe because I didn't have to have so many tests of bravery that I would have
Hmm.
to pass. But
And
yet it was appealing in some ways to be a
and it
boy.
makes you think of all the little boys that are sitting there wishing they didn't have to do that
Yes,
bravery stuff
absolutely.
as well, because it's
Absolutely.
not comfortable to everyone.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
wouldn't it be like, I just wonder how the world would be different if we all had these discussions when we were kids. Like if we were able to say
Hmm.
to our parents or our caretakers or our friends or whoever, to somebody, hey, I don't want to wear dresses all the time. Or, you know what? Uh, I don't think I would like being a boy because boys have to be brave. Is that true that boys have to be brave sometimes? Do
Yeah,
do
great
girls have to be
discussions.
brave sometimes? I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
imagine how different the
I,
world would be.
yeah, I had the exact same thought, followed by the thought that, if a teacher initiated that conversation, they'd be in prison probably for
Today they would
years.
True.
be.
Yeah.
Today they
Yes.
would be.
Or
They
they
Very
lose
would.
their
true.
job anyway, which is
But
pretty
there
sad.
are parents, young parents, who are refusing to do gender reveal parties. They're
Mhm.
refusing to do
Hmm.
gender colored clothing. The pink and blue
Yep.
is on.
Hmm.
They're saying, I'm going to let my kid tell me what gender they are when they're
Right.
ready. So some of that binary thinking is going away. It's not,
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it mainstream yet,
Not yet. Not
but
yet. There's hope.
yeah,
Okay, I have hope.
yeah. Oh, the fact that we're having this discussion, I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
Amethysta, we talked to last week, scientist, transgender. This week we're talking to Dr. Susan Miller, who's a psychotherapist. On paper, they're both very educated, smart people, but they're kind of on different spectrums, and yet kind of feel the same way about this gender.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So this is an exciting conversation,
Yeah.
actually.
And I've
Hmm.
learned a lot from young people who are experimenting with gender in a way that would, been unheard of when I was growing up. And now they've made me so much more relaxed with not having to
Yeah, because they're
choose
on to
just
something.
these. They are onto something. They are.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's been a real pleasure talking to you today.
It really has.
Thank you
It,
both. And you don't know what a pleasure it is to talk about a book you've written with people who actually have read it.
Oh yeah, we did.
It's
Look,
I know you did.
all the underlining.
I know you did. So I greatly appreciate that.
Yeah, I really enjoyed reading it too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Glad, really glad.
Yeah.
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 Thank
Thank
you
you so
so
much,
much.
Susan.
Bye.
Bye.
Do you want to recap?
Absolutely. Do you want to start?
Whoa, that would be different. Okay, let me think. We all know, if we've been listening to the podcast for any amount of time, that I am full of mom grief, right? My mom died 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Weirdly enough, last year's grief was not nearly as bad as this year's grief is. It was different. Last year's was like emotive and expressive, but this year it's like, oh, she's been gone 2 years. There's feelings of it should be gone, but it underlies everything and it comes up in big waves. And reading this book, of course I thought about my mom a lot
Of
because
course.
her mother dies in the
Yeah.
book. I also thought about my niece, who my sister, her mom, died when she was really young. She was 13. I also have a really good friend, Kara, who died about the same time my mom did, whose daughter is the same age as my daughter. I've thought about how there's nothing like a mom. Dads are great, don't get me wrong, but there is nothing like that relationship with your mother. And it is so foundational to how we manage in the world. And watching Leslie, I know you got irritated with her, and I get it.
Well, she's a teenager, for crying out loud.
And
Come
I
on.
get it, but I have so much been Leslie.
Yeah.
Like with my anger, maybe at my mom, but pushed outward towards other people who are trying to have a relationship with me, because I just fucking don't want to get hurt again. So I'm like, these are walls, baby. Watch me put these walls in place. So that I get that. Also, it was really good for me to read it because I've had feelings of guilt about, I did a good fucking job taking care of my mom when she had Alzheimer's, but I messed up some shit. I yelled at her a couple
You're
times.
human.
No, I know. I'm way human. I yelled at her. I did some stuff, 2 years out. That isn't as harsh and painful as it was in the beginning. So like the grief is stronger, but the guilt has subsided. I imagine these things are like waves and they just become part of who you are. And they just, it was good for me to read this book. I thought it was a really well done book. I like young adult reading. I like the books. I'd be happy to read more of Dr. Susan Miller's work because I liked it. I enjoyed it. It wasn't anything to me that was like this big wow aha moment. It was more like, yeah, I get that. That's so human. I feel that. I feel that strongly. Some of the words in the book, the one about that I read once already, that where she said, I can't disappear just because she couldn't appear.
Right.
Man, that like hits it on that was my mom. My mom lots of times couldn't appear the way I wanted her to. The way like Leslie, the way she wants her mom to be there. So I can't disappear just because. I just love that line.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, our mothers are very foundational, especially for women, for girl children, right? For girls, because that's the first way that we define how to be a girl or a woman, or you know what I mean? Like that's who we look to. That's our first example.
Sure.
So yeah, incredibly foundational relationship. And the part of the story and the part of the mother-daughter relationship that hit for me so hard was the guilt part of it.
Yeah, I hear you.
The guilt of not being the perfect daughter, the guilt of, you know, getting upset with my mother because she didn't or couldn't or whatever show up the way that I needed or wanted her to show up.
Mm-hmm.
The guilt of, oh my God, am I a bad kid? You know, the guilt even, as an adult of, wow, am I a good daughter now? Am I a bad daughter? Like, what should the relationship be different? Does that mean that we don't love each other? No, no, no. It doesn't mean that we don't love each other. It's just different, you know? So that hit for me. And the whole what's the word I'm looking for? The arc and the evolution, that's the word I'm looking for, of Leslie learning to see herself as separate from her mother,
Mm-hmm.
and learning to see that, and to see her mother as a whole human being, an actual person who, yeah, had some faults, sure, but that didn't mean that her mother didn't love her,
Right.
right? So no, my mom didn't die when I was a kid. My mom, thankfully, is still around. But that arc still hit for me.
Everybody has to live that arc,
Right,
right?
right,
Everybody
right,
has to live it.
right. And I guess, okay, here's my realization for today. I guess even people who have quote unquote perfect relationships with their mothers,
Totally.
even they have to go through that arc, right?
Oh, sometimes even harder because they're holding their mother on that pedestal.
Right. And then
Like,
people like me are also holding their mother on that pedestal.
the separate this is why teenagers are assholes to their mother, because they have to separate from the
Yeah.
mother.
Yeah.
They,
Yeah. That's part of them establishing boundaries and learning who they are,
yeah,
and figuring
and
out their place in the world separate from
and you can almost take it
their mom.
as a compliment if your kid is being an asshole to you, because they know it's safe to be an
Yes.
asshole.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
You can almost be like, oh, I've done a good job because my kid is being a regular little asshole to me today.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good reframe there, Jennifer.
I'm gonna remind myself that, because
Yeah, parents, take note.
my kids are really going through their separation from me right now. Like, and I'm going through my separation from them right now.
Yeah. Hell, I'm 55 and I still sometimes am like, oh man, I was a pain in the ass to my mom. Hi mom, I love you. I'm sorry.
We all were.
You
We
know?
all were.
Yeah.
That's part of it, right?
Oh
That's part of
yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I stand by it. I think this would be a really good book for a book club, because I think there's the mother element, but also the environmental issues. Also, history is woven into this book. And then we didn't even talk about how diverse the book is.
Yeah, like the issues with race, issues about, women's relationships to men,
Yeah,
uh
so much.
forgiveness and
Yeah,
redemption. I mean,
book clubs, listen up. You need to review this book.
Yeah, because we didn't even touch on probably even half
There's a
of
lot.
what we could have. Yeah.
Thumbs up on this one.
Thumbs up. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks, Raquel.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend.
Or you could leave us a comment and a 5-star review, or email us at madnesscafepodcast@gmail.com.
Thanks, everybody.